Nearly everything we do is driven by code. Every line you write, or don't write, makes a difference. The choice is yours.
Hello everyone, my name is Wouter Nederhof. Thank you all for coming, and my talk is about why you should use Kotlin and how a pitch changed everything. So a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer and I work at Rabobank. I've worked with Kotlin for over 4 years now. I'm 30 years old, married to the beautiful woman that you see on the right, and I really like rock climbing. So in this talk, I would like to share with you a story that's quite dear to my heart because it was quite a defining moment in my career, a recent event that happened. And I would like to go a little bit more in depth and discuss about why it actually happened the way it did. And my goal is to hopefully inspire some of you with this talk. So what happened was I started 4 months ago at the Rabobank. And when I started, I remember I walked into this really big building. I was like, whoa. But actually, I could only pick up my laptop because of Corona and then went home and started working with my team. And when I worked with my team, I heard some of my teammates mention like something about Kotlin. And I was like, hey, I've been using Kotlin for over 4 years and people seem interested in it. Yeah, maybe I can pitch the idea to use it and see where it goes. So I converted about 2,000 lines of code and demonstrated to the team how easy it is to take a piece of code and change it into Kotlin and explain the benefits of the language. And so the only thing they said, well, they actually liked the pitch and they said like, well, we just have to ask it to management if it's okay and to the architect, and hopefully we can go for it. So I pitched it to management and to the architect of our area. And my manager said, well, sounds really good. Why not just give it a shot, do an experiment, see how it goes, and we can evaluate later on. And so we started working with it. And about 2 weeks later, we converted with the backenders, we converted a service of around 12,000 lines of code from Java into Kotlin. And I remember that because it was the last day of my trial period, I got a permanent contract. And basically on the last day of my trial period, my manager asked me like, so how did it go? And I told her like, well, the last 2 weeks have been some of the most energizing moments of my career because I did this pitch. People liked it. From there, it went on to actually implementing it. And we went from 0 to 12,000 lines of code while some of us were still learning Kotlin. And alongside planned sprint work, we converted 12,000 lines of code with the team. And the whole energy, the whole vibe, like really everyone wanted to go for it. And people were really enthusiastic. And it was just an amazing experience. And I explained her like what the benefits were that we were already seeing. And basically she told me, well, if it's such a kind of a low risk technology and it already works for you, like I think that the experiment is already successful, why isn't it more known, at least within the Rabobank, or promoted? And so we came up with a plan to basically promote it within the Rabobank. So the first thing that I did, I was invited to talk at the internal conference, basically an IT conference. Of course, Rabobank is a really large company, so they organized this conference to share knowledge. And I talked about Kotlin and about the benefits and how to migrate. And from there on, actually, something started to happen. I've met with some people that are just as enthusiastic as I am. And basically, we started this movement. And for example, with the community manager that works at Rabobank, who manages the community at the company. And basically, we made it our goal to spread the news about Kotlin, to promote it. And so we talked to different teams about adopting Kotlin, talk to managers, to solution architects. And at some point, the community manager asked me like, well, Java and Kotlin are really close, and now they have like two separate communities. Wouldn't it be nice if those would be one? And I told him like, well, that would be fantastic, but the Kotlin community is, of course, much smaller than the Java community. So yeah, pitching this to the so-called advisory board or the so-called vakgroep within the Rabobank, I don't know if they are gonna go for it. But on the other hand, I do think it's a really good signal that Kotlin is actually something that can be used within Rabobank, and I think it would be a really great signal. So why not give it a shot? So on the 12th of May, I pitched this idea, and well, to my utmost surprise, they actually agreed with the idea. So yeah, this was like, I think one of the like really energetic moments that I had with this story, that it went from nothing to something that will probably have quite a lasting impact. Of course, it's not there yet. We still need some things done, but actually it's going to become the Java and Kotlin community. So yeah, I thought that was a really cool story to share. And but I want to actually take a little bit of a step back and talk about actually what Kotlin is. So Kotlin is basically just a programming language which targets the Java virtual machine. So, but also other platforms. But the JVM is currently the target that it. While most programs are compiled towards the JVM. It's developed by JetBrains, so you may know them from the IntelliJ IDE, and it's free and open source, so you can just adopt it whenever you want. And I asked myself this question quite a couple of times, like, why did it work? How was it possible that I just had an idea, pitched it to one person and then to a couple of other people, and then it eventually turned into something that will probably have quite a bit of an impact within the company. And I thought about this, and I think it boils down to 6 points. The first one is about demand. So, of course, we were not the only team that were using Kotlin. But as a matter of fact, at that moment, the Kotlin teams weren't that visible within the company. So basically, basically the only thing that we did as a movement is make it a little bit more visible. I think that's the main thing that happened. But I think like Kotlin was already there. The next point is about impediments. So essentially, there were some impediments for teams to adopt Kotlin and use it, related to some of the tools that were unclear whether they were fit to be used with Kotlin. But this also relates to the timing, because when I started this journey, actually it was one of the first moments actually this whole journey would have been possible, because there were some really important tooling also related to compliance that didn't support Kotlin before. So it would not be as scalable as it was at this moment. So probably if I would have started this journey earlier, I couldn't have gotten the same results. So that's really important. It's about timing. The next thing is, like, if you ever want to do something like this, you can't do this by yourself. You need a group of people, some with different talents and knowledge and connections to actually get this to work, because you can't do this by yourself. So you need to really surround yourself with great people that have the right skills that you need. I think what really helped was to have a head-first approach. So by that, I mean, well, for me, it was the first time I ever did such a thing. But I just started pitching this idea to some people. They referred me to other people, and that basically got the ball rolling, while I didn't actually know, like, where should I pitch and like who should I talk to. I found it out a little bit along the way. And the last point I want to talk about is the audience, because I've seen so many really intelligent people talking about some of the technologies that are interesting. And then they talk about that to, for example, management. And they really emphasize sometimes not the most important things. And I want to really dive a little bit deeper into that. So the point is about knowing your audience. So in the case of Kotlin, I think there are kind of two audiences, right? You have the business side and you have the developer side. So from a business perspective, really other things matter than for developers. For example, for the business, it's really important, like how to deal with turnover. For instance, what if someone leaves a team or someone joins a team? Can the new person pick up that technology? And what are the risks and gains? Like, if you invest in it, will it make you go faster? Will it produce less bugs? Questions like that are really important. And also, like, what will happen if it's, for example, supported by just one person and that person decides, like, well, I don't like it, I quit? Or is it more backed by a really large company and you're pretty sure that in the next 5 years, you can still use this tool with the right maintenance and the right community behind it? On the developer side, I think other things are interesting. For example, like, what are the features that make my life easier? And the tooling, how does the tooling allow me to do my work better? Also, what pops to my mind when I think about something like this is, how do I actually go from Java to, for example, Kotlin? How do I do this migration step? And for developers, I think it's often really key to make something like this tangible. For example, when I pitched it to my team, I gave a short demo. And I think in general, having a demonstration about technology really helps them to understand the value. So let's dive into these two perspectives, and let's discuss why I believe that Kotlin, from a business point of view, is really interesting. Well, first of all, Kotlin really makes you productive. And by that I mean is that at least JetBrains has claimed that using Kotlin, you would have to write 40% less code in order to produce a similar program as compared to Java to get the same results. Well, of course, this is JetBrains claiming this, so take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But at least in my experience, in the past 4 years that I've worked with Kotlin, there is a sense of truth in it. At least the difference is really significant because of some of the boilerplate is much less, and some of the pain points that you have in Java are less there. The next point is about bugs. So Google reported that developers that developed using Kotlin for the Android platform actually had applications that would produce 20% less errors. And I think this is maybe even more important than the previous point, because a bug can actually damage in sometimes, for example, your business, or it can have you get up at night to resolve it. But of course, this is not, it's of course for Android apps, but the only, so maybe it doesn't apply 100% to, for example, web applications. But in this case, the only differentiating factor is just the language. So I think there is some sense of truth in it. And if I look at least from my own point of view, I think, yeah, I do produce less bugs, and there are also really good reasons for that. The next important point is about the learning curve. So it takes for a Java developer to learn Kotlin, because it's so closely related. It takes 1 or 2 days to understand the basics, in my experience, and about 1 or 2 weeks to fully get productive with the language. And why is this important? Well, if your team is always static and no one swaps, and if there are more than enough developers using a certain language, then it's not an issue at all. But in this case, like, there are way less people that write Kotlin than Java. But if a Java developer is able to understand this language within 1 or 2 weeks, basically that means that you can tap from the pool of Java developers and while they're actually still learning the domain. And it even gains some benefits from an HR point of view, because you can say, hey, we're looking for Java developers, but we also use Kotlin. So for Kotlin enthusiasts, this is a really nice place to be. Then I think what's important is the compatibility with Java. So if you write a program in Kotlin, basically you can just convert one class and everything still runs. While, for example, if you would migrate to Go, you would probably have to convert a whole lot more before you get to a situation in which your application can actually exchange some or replace some feature within the old code base. Because they both run on the JVM, Java and Kotlin. So that really reduces the risk to, for example, do a migration. And also because, for example, the test suite can still be there and it can also just target, for example, the Kotlin code. But finally, I also think it's important to mention that I'm not the only one who is advocating for Kotlin. In fact, according to a Stack Overflow survey, Kotlin has been in the top 5 most favored languages in 2020, and it has grown 182% also in 2020. So it's really growing rapidly, and it's really increasing in popularity. And it is actually already the second most important language on the JVM. So let's talk about managing risks, because I think managing risks is pretty important also from a business point of view. And what do I mean with risks? Well, I've identified 4 different factors that I see as important risks when migrating to, for example, Kotlin. First of all is velocity. So that means that if you adopt a new technology, it can be the case that you first go a little bit slower before you go faster, right? You need to learn the technology and get used to it. So in this case, I think the solution is really easy. Like all you have to do is instead of when you have a really busy deadline that you really must migrate at a quiet time. And that's how you can deal with the risk for a little bit reduced velocity for some time. The second point is about bugs. So when you migrate to Kotlin, of course, you can make mistakes and that can lead to bugs. But also that is really easy to solve, because if you have a good enough test suite, if you have enough tests, well, then if you introduce a bug, your tests will tell you and you can easily fix them. The next point is about if you're not 100% confident of using Kotlin, you may want to have like an escape hatch, right? You may not put everything, you don't want to make this bet and not be able to go back. Well, in that case, there's also good news, because when you use Kotlin, basically what you can do is after you migrate it, then all the new features that you built, or at least let me put it this way. So what you can do during the migration is that you split basically the migration branches from the feature branches. And that way, at any given point, if you want to go back, you only have to take the old code and backport the feature branches. So that's also really easy to do. And it's also really not that expensive if you don't wait too long. And finally, the point about transfers, because sometimes maybe some kind of microservice may be transferred to another team, for example, but also that's something that's manageable, because oftentimes when you want to transfer service, you would have sessions about the domain knowledge anyway, and you can just add Kotlin to that or provide training to the team because the learning curve is really low. So let's also take a look at why Kotlin is interesting from a developer point of view. Well, first of all, I think the main reason is because of the non-nullable types. And what I mean by that is that in Kotlin, you can actually define a variable as either being nullable or being not nullable at all. And what this allows you to do is that basically the type checker can see that something is, for example, if something is assigned null, then it will alert in some situations, and that will cancel out most of the most famous exceptions in Java, which is the null pointer exception. The second point is about boilerplate. And with that, I mean, basically, Kotlin has some pragmatic ways to deal with the amount of boilerplate that Java used to provide. Because, for example, what you often see in Java applications are a lot of getters and setters and equals and hash code and all the like. Well, in Kotlin, they thought about it, and you can just define something like data classes, and you can specify, okay, this value, I want to generate a getter for it, and this value like a getter and a setter. So it's basically Lombok, like Project Lombok in Java, except that it's basically part of the language itself. And the next point also is interesting from a developer point of view, is about the Java interop. And so what by that I mean is that for a developer, if you would start using, for example, Kotlin, you can still use the entire stack that you would otherwise use in Java. So you can still use Spring Boot, you can still use Hibernate, you can even just still use Maven, and you can still use Gradle. So you only have to learn a little bit of new syntax and some new concepts. But other than that, all the technologies you already know, all the libraries, and you can just use them seamlessly. And finally, I think what is really nice about Kotlin, what is often a bit less, is the IDE support. Since Kotlin is developed by JetBrains, which builds IntelliJ, actually the IDE support is really, really good. So when is it interesting to migrate? Well, first of all, I think in many cases, if you have a greenfield project, also known as a new project, then I think it's really interesting. Or if your service is still small, like we converted 12,000 lines of code within 2 weeks. But the thing is that I think it's really important to always have this safety net, so that if a bug occurs, that you can easily fix it. On the other hand, I think if you have a lot of legacy or end of life, if your service is end of life, then it may not be worth the investment. Or if you have a large or complex code base, it may become painful to do this migration. And finally, if you don't have enough tests, it's probably better to first invest in that. So I also want to show that migrating is actually really easy, and there's a few steps involved. First of all, you can just use the built-in converter to convert Java to Kotlin. You then have to apply a little bit of manual labor to fix the kind of the small mistakes that the converter made, because it's not perfect. And then basically what you do is you start with the classes which have the least dependencies outward, and convert those to Kotlin, and you go backward from there. So for example, if you start with a domain object, you then start with the repository, then the service, etc., and then rinse and repeat. But I think that seeing is believing. And so for that reason, I've created a small demo in which I want to convert a simple CRUD application from Java to Kotlin. It's based on Spring Boot, and on the right, you see a little bit of the of how it looks in Swagger. But yeah, let's take a look. So basically what we have here is we have this employee. So it's an employee management system, right? You can create, read, update, destroy, or delete employees. And you have an employee, basically, which is the name and address, etc. You have a repository, which contains the employees, a service, a controller, and some DTOs, a little bit of config, and flyway migration, and of course, some tests. So let's start with employee. So all I have to do in this case is start converting. And it's pretty fast. And when it's done, this is basically the result. So now that we have the converted class, we still need to do a little bit of work. So in this case, I'll just remove the equals and the hash code, because if I use a so-called data class, it will automatically generate that. And so let's make this a data class. I want to have all of these values as part of the primary constructor. And for example, the ID, I only want to generate the getter. And ID is actually nullable, but for example, the name and the address are not. So I just remove the equals null here. And actually, so these are all false. So that's done. let's go to the DTOs. So this is new employee. So basically when you do a post request for creating a new employee, this is the object that you would use. So basically same story, remove some of the generated code, do a little bit of manual labor. In this case, again, make it a data class. And in this case, we're done. So basically, by the way, a question mark means that something is a nullable type. And if it doesn't have a question mark, it's a non-nullable type. Same again for the employee update, convert it. And in this case, it's a little bit different because when you do a patch or a put, then you only want to update the fields that are actually set. So those are all optional. So I add a question mark in here and make this again a data class. So next up is the repository. Like I go backwards, right? So this one depends on the employee and directly. So I see here that the CRUD repository expects a nullable employee. So I change it. Same for service. If I go a step back again, and there we go. So, and here what we see is that there are quite some optionals. So I can basically just replace the optionals by nullable types. And here I have this nice extension method, as it's called, to make it directly give back a nullable type instead of an optional. Here I see find all employees. It uses stream support, but we don't need it. We can just do a toList in this case. Let's take another look at optionals. So here we have an employee, but instead of optionals, we can just return null. And finally, here we have save. And in this case, it also doesn't have to be an optional. And that's it for this class. Then we have the controller, basically the same story, convert it. And there are some optionals. So let's just, and in here, double exclamation mark basically changes it will make a nullable variable into a non-nullable variable, but that can actually cause a null pointer exception. So make sure that you keep that in mind. And in this case, what I'm basically doing, for example, the ID is always mandatory, and so is the update object. So is the employee update, new employee object when you create a new employee. And basically, I think this is it. There are some bugs still, but that's because of some imports. And then finally, the Spring config for the Swagger and the application itself. And in this case, what's really nice is that I can use some idiomatic Kotlin here, which is provided by Spring Boot. I can just call run application here instead of what was there before, and which is idiomatic for Kotlin. And yeah, remove this JVM static. Yeah, and we're done. So let's take a look. So now there are only 138 lines of code, and before there were 263. So that's a pretty big difference. So yeah, really easy to convert a Java application to a Kotlin application. Which brings us basically to the conclusions. Well, let's draw a few. Well, I hope I could convince you that in many cases, Kotlin is both a good idea from a business point of view, as well as from a developer point of view. Also, I wanted to show you that even if you're not very high up the management chain, but you're just developing software, you can actually make a big difference at your company. Even if it's a really big company like the Rabobank, you can make a difference. But there are actually two prerequisites. First of all is the opportunity. So in this case, that it was like a lot of people were already using it and there was a demand for it. But I think second of all, the fact that we have this engineering culture within the Rabobank that would allow me to this really open culture in which I could just discuss this openly, and people would really help me on my journey, really helped me to get, basically make this work. I also think that nobody will do it for you, right? You have to take the lead yourself. People will help you along the way, but you're in control. So you have to do it. And going head first really helped, really worked for us. Finding the right people is really important if you want to, if you want your idea to work. And I think if you make a pitch, always target the right, always know your audience. I think that's really important. Well, thank you for your time. I really hope you enjoyed it. And well, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.
Code is everywhere. You get up with it in the morning. You take it with you on the go. It brings us closer to one another. It makes life easier, nicer, and it allows you to discover the world, make new connections, realize ambitions. It may even save your life. Nearly everything we do is driven by code. Every line you write, or don't write, makes a difference. That's why we write code that contributes to a better world, that helps shape a sustainable food chain, that empowers people to become financially self-sufficient and gives people back control of their data. Whatever you dedicate your talent to, or don't, makes a difference. The choice is yours. What difference will you make?